Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. We're live in Denver at HFMA, and this is podcast number 8.
Woo.
Wow. Saving the best for relatively last. I have my good friends, John and Gary, here, and what's happening? John, sounds like news as of yesterday. I mean, do you want to tell the world? This is going to come out much later, but
yeah,
huge news.
You know, Switch got acquired by Notion Health, and I think it's just a really exciting time to expand upon what they built and further invest in the client experience and just do great things for great people.
So I think it's the fastest moving from announcement to being the CEO to announcing you're not the CEO, maybe ever. Like grand opening, grand closing.
I would say.
I mean, how short was that?
It was a couple months.
Okay.
I'd say the window is small. Patience is not my middle name, but you got a bigger vision.
You're a mover. You're a mover and shaker.
Try to.
Yeah, fast. All right.
Yeah.
So John's world's changing. Gary, your world. How long have you been the VP or the CRO there? Ohio. You're at Ohio Health.
Ohio Health.
Just for everyone
4
knows.
years as the executive as of July 1st.
Woohoo.
So, yeah, next week.
4 years.
4 years. It is 4 years.
And you were a pharmacy guy before, right?
Pharmacy guy before. Worked in the industry, pharma industry for a little while. Decided I wanted to do some things around the business sector of pharmacy. And then one thing led to the next. I was doing pharmacy finance and pharmacy, revenue management, and then moved into revenue cycle. And then here I am now, 4 years into the role.
So 4 years in, do you think you're like, I'm starting to get the hang of this?
Yeah, that's
or
a
do
good
you
question.
still get terms once in a while? You're like, what does that mean? Like, you're not going to ask questions, but I get it. I still get stuff.
I'm learning all the time. I mean, I think everybody as an executive is going to learn the way, things have been done for like 20 years within the teams. It's all culture. It's all the teams that have been doing this. We're in this paradigm shift now, an evolution of people who have been in these roles for years and years and years, know one way. How do you get them to think differently, especially when we're talking about technology and automation? Their jobs they want to protect sometimes,
Yeah.
But that's where we are. I think revenue cycle executives now are more leaders of revenue cycle rather than just revenue cycle, experts.
Right.
I think you have
True.
to be a leader of revenue cycle.
Can I ask a question of my fellow guest?
Yeah, take it over. Yeah.
So think about it. You've been there 4 years. You took over something great. You continue to make it better and better. What's like the coolest accomplishment as you think about your last 4 years? What are you like, man, we did it?
So the mission for me when I first started with our CFO was we needed to reduce our costs. We knew we were a high cost model and we needed to drive that down. So that was the game plan. So over these past several years, I'll share, we've gotten from a cost to collect we started around 3.3. I mean, I can say now we're running around 2.4 to 2.5.
Yeah.
Now I get it. Everybody's going to say, well, what do you have in your cost to collect? What do you, don't have?
Measuring against yourself. You're measuring against yourself, though.
At the end of the day, it's your operating expense over your cash. That's as simple as it gets. And those numbers don't lie. They're easy, objective, and that's what my CFO and I have talked about. And he's seen that trend, and my COO has seen that trend too. So I hold to that. You don't have to necessarily reduce expense. You can maybe even stay where you want to be as long as you're increasing revenue. So I think people hear cost to collect, they immediately go to the expense line. No, there's ways that you can go to the revenue line that can get your cost to collect where you need to be. It's a balance. And that was the whole mission. That was the whole glide path. And I love that fact that we got there in various ways.
I'm so happy to hear you mention that you can manage something not just solely on expense, but the revenue piece is so important. And from my experience, I think more people can and should look into that because revenue is fundamentally almost everything, right?
Yeah.
What do you think you're going to do to, further, like, what's your next investment? What's your next pivot?
Yeah, I think we still have a lot of opportunity in automation. I mean, that's a very broad statement, but AI, I think, is there. I believe AI is a spectrum. You can be on very cutting edge AI, but honestly, I think we are somewhere in the infancy still, to where even just some regular algorithms, machine learning, even some bot, it will get us to AI. But so I look at it as a spectrum. So yeah, I'm still in that mindset. So I think for us, we are driving a lot around our ambulatory strategy. So let's take a step back here now. So now that we've been on this journey for 4 years, we're an integrated delivery system. We've maximized what we're doing in the hospital. I think we have a great system in place.
Sure.
Obviously, opportunities. We need to really start thinking about the ambulatory strategy, because at the end of the day, one could argue to say, is your strategy for your primary care or specialty practices to just get patients to the hospitals, or are you trying to be profitable in those areas? So it's high volume, low revenue in a lot of ways, but in this world where physician relations, how you're driving ambulatory is going to be our strategy. So we're putting a lot of emphasis in that space. So bringing it back full circle, coding becomes more important. How do we look at coding in that space from the physician lens? I think CDI becomes important on the inpatient side, but even understanding what your coding education looks like for your outpatient areas as well too. So it can be HCC optimization, it can be other things like that. So we're trying to shift everything more front versus, and you guys know this as much as I do, we can't just have safety nets sitting in the back of the revenue cycle anymore. That's high cost, right? So if you just have all these safety nets sitting in the back of your revenue cycle, catching stuff that's not going right up front, you're going to lose. I mean, you'll never get to your cost you want to get to. So
I'm hearing you're looking at offensive moves, not just defensive from the past. Traditional healthcare, little defensive.
Yeah, and I think labor arbitrage came into play for us for offshore model. I mean, it was a way for us to do a point solution, pointed solutions where we felt necessary, but that was early on. So that glide path was key for us to start that way. To your point, now that we've gotten to a cost to collect, I'm actually in the opportunity to say, let's invest, because now that we're in our sweet spot, the conversation around expense and revenue, it's much more amenable to having conversations of investment versus someone just, to your point, people get stuck saying, I got to reduce my expense. That's the goal.
I got to cut 10% across the board.
Well,
right?
and that's how, working with your CFOs, helping them understand your glide path, building a long-term strategy. You got to put that strategy out in front.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's switch topics a little bit. I would like to hear from you both. And one of the podcasts I did earlier, we talked a lot about leadership, kind of like to your point before about kind of like leadership being, and you guys are both in big leadership positions. What is your framework for how you think about being a leader? And what is it like what I asked to Kim Davis was like, what would you pass on to someone else? The way that you what advice would you give the next generation of leaders? So I would like to hear from both of you, your own perspectives. John, you go first.
Oh, goodness. I think for me, you just got to care, and you got to care more. And I think people see it in your eyes. They read your body language. It's infectious energy. I think caring really matters, but I also think you need to articulate the plan and be willing to step in and help. I think that's my first answer is care more than anybody else, spread that good energy, but be willing to back it up in investments and be willing to step in with them.
That's really good. No, I agree. And leadership for me, honestly, is you have to be able to sell. I will say it. You have to have some salesmanship, being able to talk about strategy. Again, I come back to you need to be an expert enough, but you have to be able to sell your ideas. You need to promote your ideas. You need to be able to have conversations with different audiences, whether that's a clinician, whether that's an operator, whether that's a finance person. I think that's where we are in revenue cycle, is we need more of that, because otherwise, I go back to what the question was before. Otherwise, you get caught in this conversation about expense 24/7. So, I got a question for you, actually. So, you've seen many revenue cycle leaders. Are we moving in that direction, or do you agree that we need to get out of just having the subject matter experts driving the revenue cycle? They need to be more strategists, more self promoters of their team and speaking outwards. Are we seeing that?
If I could plug my friend Ben Riegel to my right, I would say it kind of depends on like the community people have built. And I think, Ben, that's your biggest weapon and biggest superpower is building community where, Gary,
That's
people
really
like yourself,
good.
I've even seen you
Right.
kind of, put your veil down, be vulnerable with your colleagues in the industry and recognizing things where you may have been a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
And it's a chance for learning, like this is what, Tracy's doing at Cleveland Clinic. So I think that vulnerability in the community that Ben's built has helped people like yourself and others be better. I think the economics and maybe the current situation in our country has forced rev cycle leaders to push the envelope where they'd been a little tentative or nervous. So I think I'm seeing more come out of their shell and knowing that they have to take some risks, but I think we have more work to do.
I think
I love your opinion, Ben. You mean
Well,
he's exactly right. You
we've
build
been asked a
community.
couple times, like at different times for Forum, to be able to like do work around communicating up. That most rev cycle leaders have not been good about telling their own story, and it actually what separates them from being able to continue to move up or continue, but also to continue to get more resources or whatever. So I don't know if you came to this one. We did
I did.
maybe a couple years ago in Scottsdale. We did these I created this fictional. I don't know if you were there. Fictional
I was there.
scenario.
Yeah.
And everyone had to ask for like 60 million or more resources and go in front of a panel of CFOs, which I got.
Yep.
And they had to present as a group, like, here's what we did, right?
And that was vulnerable. I mean, we had to. So you had every cycle executive
having
who
to
had
work
be
together.
vulnerable. Yeah.
Who
And
don't never work
right,
together.
But you put a forum in place or a case study in place where sometimes we'd go back and forth at the table of, do we want to pursue it this way or do we want to pursue it that way? I had not been in a situation where I heard someone else take their different stance, and I had a different opinion, to be honest with you, that someone else did. Not to say it's wrong, our opinions, it's just an approach. I think it was a good opportunity for us to be vulnerable that you brought forward.
But
in
it's
that
also
community.
like trying to get better at being able to tell a story, because the issue that you guys are running up against mostly is that most CFOs do not grow up in rev cycle, so they don't really understand it.
Right.
And they don't want to say that, but the reality is that is what you're up against.
Right.
And so you have to be very good at telling your story.
Right.
Oftentimes what I also see is like, I'll get a call from a recruiter. I'm sure you get lots of them. We're looking for this person. They need to be strategic, and then they need to be, they need like all this knowledge, and they need to be a good operator. And I'm like, shit, like who are you talking about? Like,
Right.
these are unicorns,
Right.
bro. Like, I don't know what you think you're
Right.
gonna get. And my point there is not you can't have someone that's operational knowledge and be strategic, but they're not both. Like I'm not very good at operations. I did it,
Yeah, I understand.
but I am very strategic, and I can think a large picture and figure out where we need to go. I think the role was what you're describing should shift into more of the strategic, and it's not always been that.
Yes, I agree.
And so that person who fits that role, yes, Kim Davis is a good example. I just did this thing with Kim. She's to the point where she's like, I don't need to know all my people that work from these roles. Like, I can't do those roles anymore. But my job is to empower them to create the situation where I'm removing barriers, I'm removing all those roadblocks, so they can go do it, because I'm not the person. And I was like, but the problem is the CFO expects a lot of times that person to do all of it.
Yes.
And so that's where I actually think we need to get better and better at like getting those roles and saying the role is strategic.
Right.
Because to think like tomorrow, 10 years from now, it's not going to be like the best. Honestly, it's going to be people thinking ahead. How is AI going to shift? How are the payers going to shift?
Right.
And then being able to kind of meet the trajectory.
Yeah.
That's the people that are going to win.
You're spot on, and you're making me think about like being even here for a moment, right? So you see all these presentations on automation or the vendors that are out there with technology. You two understand this because you two have that mindset of promotion, of strategy. At the end of the day, this stuff's not cheap. So when you're going to a CFO, to your point, and what you did in your forum,
It's so
then
true.
is you've got to sell it.
Totally.
And you know what's unfortunate? It actually could be a great technology, but if you can't promote it within your organization, it's not going anywhere because it's a cost. And I think we have to understand how there's a mutual alignment on what are you seeing our return on investment? What's the value proposition? I don't know if. I hope that we all can do better in that space because, to your point, Ben, CFOs are expecting that. And I think one of the things I appreciate about who I work for is my job, he said, your job is to bring recommendations and analysis of options. So when I go into any meeting with him on a recommendation, I give him 3 options and 1 recommendation. And one of the options can be horrible. It could just be status quo. But you got to create your story so then you can have your debate. That's the way I approach it. But I'm sitting here thinking, there's all these great potentials, but if you can't promote it, you're not going to be able to advance forward because of the way the mindset is.
It's not just even promotion, the point of you coming to here. And I'm not going to say that like you're going to get this education and you learn something brand new.
Sure.
Hopefully that's the case. That's not necessarily always the case. The point is though, you get out of your day-to-day and you're just having conversations with other people, which is my point about community, right? I talk to a lot of VPs of RevCycle that don't come to anything. Or if they do, they're not really getting community, and so they're not really getting a challenging thought or challenging like, oh, I should think about it this way.
Right.
I think that's also what gets people in trouble. It's like, we're just going to keep heads down and do this.
Are you looking for a judgment-free revenue cycle space? Do you want to expand your revenue management skills and learn insider strategies? Check out RevCycle 101. Unlock the foundations of healthcare finance with RevCycle 101, a comprehensive course designed to give anyone, from a recent graduate taking their first professional steps to a seasoned sales leader refining their expertise, the clarity and confidence to excel in revenue cycle management. Through easy-to-understand terminology, practical tools, and proven methods, this course demystifies the complexities of the revenue cycle. It equips you with the skills to drive results, optimize operational efficiency, and significantly advance your career in the shifting realities of today's healthcare industry. Click the link in the description for more information. Now back to the show.
Status quo.
Well, let me ask you guys a question, kind of being a little newer, even though every time I say that, you say I can't say it anymore.
Can't say
I've
that
been in
anymore.
healthcare
No.
for 11 years.
No, you can't say that.
But what's like the genesis? What's the foundation? Why have people in the past been so reluctant to seek help with their peers or their colleagues? Because what I would say is, as a wannabe entrepreneur and a wannabe CEO is like, sometimes it's lonely at the top. And there's, my relationships, I know I call you guys, I have other folks in my friend group that I can call and lean on because I need that release, even if it's just venting and I'm not seeking advice back. That's healthy for me. So what do you guys think has been the genesis of why RevCycle leaders have just remained closed off, or they don't want to come to certain events or network with your peers of what's working, what's not? Why do you think that has been a foundation for so long?
I don't know if it's a foundation. I would say that it's not just relegated to RevCycle leaders. I think it's relegated to people.
Okay.
That there's this piece of like an ego that's like, I've got it together. So if you think about imposter syndrome for a lot of people is like, of the top 100, Fortune 100 CEOs, the number one thing that they struggle with, if they're asked blindly, right, is that they don't think they belong in the role. So that is literally, you would think, the
show no
best
weakness.
CEO, the most prepared, right? Like the most qualified, say this, over 70% of them would say they don't think they belong in the role. So I think you've just transitioned that to like a Gary, who I'm not saying you don't belong in the role. I'm saying he probably, when you first started, he probably thought, I don't belong in this role.
And I still have it sometimes. I mean, that's something I definitely, and being vulnerable here, can struggle with. Yeah, because it's competitive. There's this.
You didn't grow up in that
I didn't grow
world.
up in that world, right?
So you're in this spot, and people are. You think even if people aren't judging, you're like, people are judging me.
Right.
So I think there's this ultimate piece of like the ego gets in the way of, because I think there's a difference between community and like HFMA, which is great. There's nothing wrong with this. This is all good. But that and authentic community, which Christina and I talk about a fair amount, whereas like, which is what I try to create, because I think that is where I can be. Again, if you go back to the challenge support matrix, which is what I build everything on and like my forums, that is authentic community. Because if Kim can challenge you to think a little differently, it's just so different than if no one does. So and then the point of being like support, where John, you're saying is like, yes, there are times where it's like you need someone to support you, and you need someone to kind of like talk you out of a crazy spot because you talked yourself into it, and it's lonely at the top.
So lonely.
So I don't think it's pervasive amongst RevCycle leaders. I think it's just, or stuck with them. I think it's just leaders in general need this, and I think, kind of hopefully turning the corner of like understanding they need it more than they thought.
Yeah, and not comparing, contrasting, saying one's better or not. I think they're just very different. I've always appreciated your intentionality of how you structure your forums and just your overall community, even beyond RCM Leaders Forum and the company that you're running and began, which came out of an idea from one of the forums in New Orleans.
That's correct.
Is that you've been intentional about bringing people together to share ideas. We're here in Denver for a few days. This is the wild, wild west. I don't know if you guys are tired or not, but it is hard to stop, pause, and have like real authentic conversations. I feel like this is almost like fraternity and sorority rush, where you're shaking a lot of hands of people you want to see and you do care about, but it is so...
There's a value to this.
Yeah.
So if HFMA is listening, there's a value to this at a large scale.
Yeah.
There's 100% value. But it's different if you need this other group where it's like, or I've talked myself into a weird spot and I need someone to talk to me.
Yeah.
I better have a few people I can call that I know can help me walk through it, where I can be vulnerable. And I think what often happens is people confuse like my team with that. And I'm like, you're never going to get that from a team member.
Yeah.
As much as you might like them, as much as you're even friends with them, the reality is like, if you're their boss, you're never getting that.
Yeah.
Or talking to your boss, like it's not the same.
Well, they also may have not have sat in your seat, right?
Right.
Whereas if you're reaching out to your peers, whether it's Kelly, UT Southwest, et cetera, you can either lean on them for advice because they have gone through it, or they can say, hey, I haven't, but let's take a look at this. Here's what I would do, or here are some options to help you make a good decision, or potentially avoid a mistake.
And as I'm reflecting now of my 4 years, honestly, one of the things that I'm really happy about is honestly the network. You just reminded me, the network that was created. I mean, I think if we met early on too, given the opportunity for the community, the names that I know in my head that I think about who I go to really came from your community, the forums you have in the HFMA forums as well too. But when you really need to get to conversation, it's opened up this, honestly, it's helped me. I'll be honest, I don't know, as I mentioned my glide path of my cost of plug, I don't know if that would have happened if I didn't have people to talk to. I was just learning and I was getting opinions, being able to then take that, do my own research with my team to then set the course. I'm thinking back, I don't know if that was possible without a community. I don't know if that was.
And I think your community, because again, it's been so fun watching you grow, is, you and I brainstorm sometimes on like, what should I do in this situation? I'm like, oh, you got to call this person.
Yeah.
Or, hey, I know this health system used this strategy and I'm not sure it works so great, but talk to them. And I think that's helped you maybe made some winners and prevented mistakes.
I 100% agree. I mean, there's a lot, and I will continue to do that as we go into the next phase for us. As I mentioned in our ambulatory strategy now, it's already happened. I mean, I've been getting a lot of good information from people that's putting our glide path forward in our strategy. So really, really good to have this community. I don't know if I'd be successful, looking back to say, because you don't have to be the expert. Going back to what we were saying, you don't, but if you have the right community, learning, understanding, being able to promote what you're doing, and that's what it's about. And I think that's what CFOs expect. I think they expect that. You don't have to be an extrovert, so don't take it as you have to be an extrovert. No. You don't.
Yes.
It's not about that. So I hope people listening, I know I'm an extrovert and naturally, but you don't have to be. You can just really bring it through the community and then we'll learn it.
Kim is an incredible leader. She is a complete introvert.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
And I know it because every time I talk to her and I was like, oh my gosh, like, you're doing what? And she's like, yeah, I'm just, it's like,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
But if you just talk to her briefly, you'd be like, oh, she's not. People confuse that all the time.
Yeah.
I also think it's like, one thing you said earlier is like, I think it's easy to have an opinion. So this is the thing about going to your own team with like, it's easy to have an opinion, but to John's point, if they've never been in your shoes,
Yeah.
like, you got to take all those with a grain of salt, like, a lot of times. And I think that's also where people probably get tripped up a little bit, is like, my team thinks we should do this. I'm like, yeah, and they might be right. And it's good to hear them.
Yeah.
But the reality is, like, until they've been in, like, your spot where you have to convince a CFO, because oftentimes, how often do you hear a team member be like, I can't believe they wouldn't do this? And you're like,
Right.
well, it's not that simple. Like,
Right.
or you weren't in the room. Remember, like, early in your career, when you weren't in the room when executives made a choice, like, why'd they make that decision? God, these guys are idiots.
Right.
I hear this all the time. And then I remember, I'll never forget, we're at HealthRise, and I remember being in the room, and, you know, we built that company, right? So, and I remember being like, God, this is hard. Like, what do we do? And I looked around the room. I'm like, isn't there someone older we can ask? Right? And I literally, that's the first thing out of my mouth. And everyone's like, I think this is it. Like, we got to decide what to do. I'm like, and you know, they hit me. It's one of those moments I talk about where it's like, oh, we're the old people in the room.
Yeah.
And and I don't know when the shift happens, but it's like, yeah, now I got to make the decision.
Yeah.
I think whether you're a CEO, CRO, like whatever your leadership title is, I compare what we're talking about to, you know, the football fans, that the Monday morning quarterbacks.
So true.
You know, you're on the 5-yard line, 7 seconds, and something happens, whether it's a penalty, a potentially bad play call, but although it would have been awesome if it would have worked. But everybody's questioning the play call Monday morning. But until you have 35 seconds on the shot clock and 80,000 people watching your moves, it's tough to judge.
Yeah.
It is so hard.
Yeah.
And in the moment, it's like trying to figure out what to do, you know, like.
In the moment.
And I'm not saying leaders always make the right choice. They don't. But actually, the worst thing that can happen, I heard this a long time ago, is like, the worst thing you can do is actually not make a decision at all.
Right.
It's better to make the wrong decision and go forward knowing it might not work than make no decision.
Right.
And actually, what I see probably more often is people making no decision. Not doing anything.
No action. That's
No
frustrating.
action.
Yeah. That's because you can either, you know, there's going to be times you fail, you learn from it, and then you go forward. But that's a pet peeve of mine, is no action.
Why do you think that is? Like, from the provider community, why do you think a lot of providers, granted, again, so many variables that people don't know about, but I know we chatted about this before. Why do you think people are so reluctant to make a decision either way?
It's a good question. I think people are risk averse. If they're not 100% on something, they're not good with just being 80%. It's almost like, you know, they want to be perfect, or something has to be fully baked. So I think there's that mindset still, especially in financial operations, right? I mean, there is a worry that if something goes wrong, there is a true consequence to that is going to hit bottom line potential. So, but again, I think you have to take calculated risk. I always say it's a calculated risk. It'll never be 100%, and you have to have conviction to your point, to take action and do it. Calculated in how you've actually approached it.
But it has to be the culture it's in.
Sure.
Right? I mean, it
Absolutely.
has to be almost one of the largest factors here is actually like, is the culture okay with like maybe taking a risk and failing?
Yeah.
Or is it like, we don't take a risk?
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is even when you do it, I think, and probably has happened, is everybody on board to make it successful when it's not 100%. So even if it's 80%,
Comfortable in that
are
weird
they
time,
comfortable
right?
in that? So it's all about working in the gray. I personally like the gray. I don't know if all
Same.
revenue cycle folks like the gray. And I think they like the black and white, which goes to maybe to this conversation. You've got to live in the gray in order for us to keep advancing forward. So there's always just some natural hesitation to want to do something because there's so many different factors. And again, if you have the right culture, I do agree. The culture has to be ready to be able to accept the fact that something might be 80%, that you've taken the calculations together that you're going to afford.
Well, that, and it has to be, I would say, I'm going to use the term psychologically safe.
Yes, that's a
Because
good
what you
point, too.
cannot have, which I
Right.
had a leader do this to me, is after the fact being going, I told you guys this wouldn't work.
Yeah, that's
And I'm like, we all signed up for it.
Yeah.
We all said we're going to do it.
Yeah.
So I don't know why you're
That's
saying
tough.
that now, but that absolutely happens.
That's tough.
So you can't have that situation where
Absolutely not.
I had that
Especially
once
at
in my
a season
career,
level.
and that was the worst. You know, myself and my team never got credit for the decisions that worked, but the ones that didn't, which we would always pivot quick and we would own it, it was the I told you so's. And it actually, it ruined a personal relationship with a friend of mine because I couldn't, it's tough, you know? Yeah, I
Well,
told you so, are brutal.
It creates a toxic environment where it's like, then it's never psychologically safe to bring up an opinion. Then you don't want to, you're not going to even say the thing that you think is good.
So let me ask this question then. Do you think revenue cycle has naturally been risk averse because, and you guys know this, we're never a lot of times recognized for the great things we do. We're always recognized for the stuff that goes bad.
No, that's 100%.
And so if you're in
That's
that
a big portion of it.
right. So if you're already in that mindset, that's the culture of the revenue cycle, that you're already risk averse because you're already going to know that if it doesn't work out, well, you're going to get called out like you normally do, versus it being success. I think it goes back to maybe we have to keep promoting what we do, showing value. But I think I've learned from my team a lot of times, yeah, they've told me we always get called out when something goes wrong. It's never when things go right a lot of
But
times.
I also think you grew up, like everybody grew up in a clinical, this all grew up out of a clinical area whose whole thing is
Decision.
don't do any harm.
Don't do any harm.
And don't
That's
and
right.
do everything that would be like standard so that you stay. Now I know there's groups that are innovating and trying to do new things in a minute, but most providers are not doing that.
Right.
And so I do think you grew up in this like culture that has permeated into RevCycle. Because it just naturally kind of like, well, yeah, we're risk averse. We're a hospital. This is a big infrastructure. It's like turning a cruise ship, right? It's like we go slow. We're not moving any making big turns. I think what probably unintended consequence of that culture is shifting over into like this, where it's like, yeah, we don't do that. And then the way that I think, like to your point, RevCycle works is like it rarely is like, look how good we did.
Right.
Well, a lot of the things you've been talking about lately, how do we translate that and what's going on in this country and also in healthcare as it applies to, some policy changes and the economy and whatnot? How has that, I'll use the term crutch, we'll say crutch in this case is resistant to make a decision or fear of making a decision that could cost my job. How does that intersection look like? Because that might be the four-way stop of where we're either at or might soon be at. How does that work?
Like, how does it work? Clarify a little bit. How does it work between taking a risk and the culture that we're at, that we have?
Maybe like the nature, the ingrained nature in healthcare being a little slower to move and or a little conservative. Trickle that down to rev cycle decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And then the environment where we're at now, where, academic medical centers probably the most are getting, a lot of pressure. But really just the country right now, healthcare is now under a huge microscope, more than the past 10 years. I don't mean to be having the same conversation we've heard for 10 years, right? But how does that intersection look like? Reluctance and or speed of change, or open-mindedness to change or make a decision versus the current economic headwinds?
Well, I would say, I'd probably try to answer it with this. I would think that the market is always the market. And right now what's happening is, we saw this at the last forum. About half the groups came in and like, we got to cut 250 million. And I got to lay off 100 people. And the other half, Gary, because you weren't there, the other half was like, we just had a record quarter. Best quarter we ever had.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
So we had like, and I was like, holy shit, we got like,
A lot of
we got the
options.
full spectrum from like groups that are like, literally a guy could not come because he had to come up with 100 names in RevCycle to get cut, right? And so, and then I got and I was like, what? And then I realized what was happening. What was happening is the groups that had started to like have these record quarters, they did a bunch of work in 22 and 21 and 23. Strategically thinking like, it is not coming back to what it was.
Right.
And then we got a whole bunch of people on this other side that were like, I mean, well, yeah, volumes are from 2019 are gonna come back, right? And so I'm not. And then now they're like panicking because the site of care is gonna get
Site neutrality.
site neutrality is gonna get.
Yeah.
And so they're like freaking out, right? And they should be, because that probably is going away.
Yeah.
So I say that like the market is kind of saying like the ones that have thought through and been strategic about like, we got to make stuff change. And it's not all just like they're in great neighborhoods or something. This is like, some academics in not great places.
Right.
making real money. And so, I mean, real money isn't like doing well enough to like they're doing good, right? Like
Right.
surviving. There's other groups, they're not in that spot.
So I guess, yeah, and adding to what you said, going to your question too, I think at the macro level, couldn't we see some of this coming? I guess sometimes I'm going to ask the question, we in healthcare, are we really good at projecting and thinking out 5 years ahead and building a glide path to what you just said? There were people in that room, it sounds like, that had great quarters because of what they did several years ago for what they might have seen coming versus it seems like healthcare overall, sometimes we just wait for it to happen because we wait on maybe
Yes.
a legislation that we hope is not going to go through.
But this is the inaction.
Yes, that I
Because
agree.
they're
That's right.
because they're frozen because they think like, well, this could change and this could change, and so it's like, well, and sometimes you just have to be like, nope, we're gonna go this direction and we're gonna try to like change it as best we can.
And you're going to have a lot of people say, why
Because
are we doing
know
this?
things are going to change. When I did
Exactly.
my talk on this
Yeah.
at Central Ohio, or I did my talk at Forum about the
Yeah.
history of healthcare, right?
Yeah,
But part of that was that things are
it's coming.
things are going to change. You can't control the government. So yes, the government's going to do crazy stuff. We know Trump's going to do maybe something crazy. The reality is like you can't predict it. No matter what we say. So the reality is like, okay, you know that. So make yourself ability to change and move fast enough where you can actually make up with some of those things, which I
agree.
know is hard. I
It is
know it's a health
very hard.
system. I know it has an infrastructure, but you can't tell me anymore that there aren't places figuring it out. This is the thing. If every health system in the country right now was at negative margins, then we're having a different conversation.
Right.
But that is
We're
not,
not.
true.
It's not.
And HCA's been doing 10+%
Yeah.
for 30 years.
Yeah.
Something that's coming to mind is I recently spent some time with some guys at a DC ex-advisory board that have kind of come back together and they formed a research group. And so what comes to mind is as we think about, did we not think about what's coming ahead years in advance? I would look to you, Gary, and say, are you and other providers subscribing to some type of research institution, whether it's advisory board, whether it's union healthcare, et cetera? And or if you are, and maybe if you're not, is it just still too noisy because you're getting thrown so much? And it's like, what should I take in? What should I not? Is it getting cluttered? So like, what do you think about that when we think about projecting the future? Because I think I might have just had a light bulb moment of like, nope, I get why these guys should exist now, because they are doing this research on a macro level about what is currently going on and the trends that will happen, possibly quarter over the next 2-3 years to give providers a heads up. Do you subscribe to any, forward-looking research?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I mean, I have all the outlets that I look at. I'm a social media guy. I'll look at what some of the opinions are as well too. I connect with our government relations team internally a lot, so I'm using a lot of what they're saying out there as well too. So there's many forums. The one thing I do think though, as you mentioned, it's hard to project out because you'll get all these different insights, different information, and sometimes I think it happens where we think something's going to happen that might have a consequence, but it never does. So people then get stagnant and they don't act. But I think that we get caught up in that. We have to think about, and I think even within our organization right now, we know that we have opportunities for an outlook of 5 years out that we probably need to optimize certain things in other areas, maybe in supply chain and those as an example, and purchase services. But is
It's
there an
so
urgency?
true.
There's
Well-
no urgency, but there is in my mind, because if you don't, you're going to get stuck in that group that
Right.
has to cut 250 million or whatever it is.
But it's almost like I'm going to use transparent pricing as an example. How much time, energy did
Yeah.
we waste on transparent pricing? Everyone's freaking out. And my guess is if you were the organization was like, okay, that's fine. We're just gonna keep doing and moving along and ignoring it. The penalty is almost nothing.
no.
It's nothing. It doesn't mean anything. And so like think about that. Like, nope, screw all this other stuff. We're gonna laser focus on what we're trying to do. My guess is like you're gonna have to probably the CEOs, the best CEOs in the future are gonna have to be like, well, we're not doing anything on that.
Right.
And then I guess sue us. Or what
Right. And
right.
focus
And I hate
on
to
it-
say that,
focus
but
on
it's
other
so
things.
true
Right.
because I think like there's enough noise. There's so much
there's
noise,
a lot of noise.
that like no, I gotta focus
gotta
on
be hard
just
for you.
stay blinders on and be like, okay, fine, but like we're not doing that. I do think there's so much wasted time at the health system level and things that might happen, or the things that we think are going to be huge impacts that just, like to Gary's point, just never really come to fruition. And then what did we just do?
It's hard at the provider level. It is hard, to your point. There's a lot of noise. How do you set
Like, how many emails do you get a day that don't matter?
Right.
Coming from people on my end. Right?
No, I mean, there's
that's a
tons of
different problem.
stuff.
Totally.
Right.
But
AI is going to fix that.
Right.
True. It's still noisy though, right?
There's
How do you
a
pause
lot
and
of
get in the
noise.
mindset where you can like, okay, I'm going to digest this 10-page article about complicated the next 8 quarters.
Yeah.
Here's what's going on in Washington. Here's how it can affect Ohio health.
Yeah.
How do you get that free space?
And all jokes aside, but seriously, I'm a big fan of Copilot right now.
Oh.
So Copilot is like my best friend.
Okay.
I'm using it all the time. So talk about AI in some way. So sorry, you just made me think. I literally use Copilot on all things, emails, articles.
Is it writing emails for you though?
It
No,
does.
automatically. Or is it going through sorting your? There's a new thing called Fixer.ai that like does on the front end, reads all your emails. Ones it knows it should respond to, creates a response, and then you go in and say,
haven't gotten there. I'm using Copilot.
I want to try that.
Because let's think about the culture of healthcare. How many times you guys see email threads of like 15? And that's like the biggest pet peeve of mine. Like after third one, pick up the phone, right?
Well,
But
the worst
that's-
is when it's between 5 and 9 p.m. too, and there's 17 emails back and forth.
So we need, so I'm using Copilot. Bringing back to your point, I mean, I think there's so much information to digest. You got to stay the course. You got to believe in what you're doing. And yeah, what I was doing back when I started on this glide path, it was not popular. But I knew my boss believed in it. He agreed with it, and he saw that if we execute on this, it will put us in a good position. And I think that helped. But it was a lot of tough conversations, not even just internally with my team, but even with others within the organization that's saying, you're taking a risk here, a chance in something.
Take a risk and stay on the path.
And stay the course.
All right, boys, I'm sorry. We do have to cut it. I didn't realize what
It's a
time
wrap.
it was. Great work. See how fast
Time
40
flew
minutes
by.
went by. No, great conversation. Thanks you both
Thanks
for
a lot.
joining. Glad we had it. So let's do it again next year.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thanks,
All right.
man. Appreciate it.